Hey everyone, welcome to Dirk Island. I'm Michael Durkheimer.
I'm Alec Durkheimer.
And this is the weekend show where we talk about fascinating things that we're learning about the world, usually through watching documentaries. On this episode, we're talking about Leaving Neverland, the hugely controversial, possibly paradigm-shifting documentary about Michael Jackson and the accusations made by two people about him being molesting them as children and having these intense relationships. And what we really focus on this week are two real questions that are driving the debate. One is, do we have to forget about Michael Jackson? The other is, why was I so stupid for so many years as to believe that Michael Jackson was the only man who was allowed to sleep in the same bedroom as young boys, and that was normal? Because I believed it, and I have to deal with that now. It's difficult to put all of the blame on someone else. Always, like the parent. You think that his parents are so stupid, right? They let him sleep in a bed with Michael Jackson. How stupid is that? Well, who are all of we who know that's a fact and believe nothing wrong was happening? Who are all of we? See, that's where I feel like the burden is so ridiculous. Because we're sitting here going, oh, these parents are so stupid for letting their kids do this. It's so irresponsible. And then we're all going, yeah, well, Michael Jackson could have been sleeping with kids in his bed and nothing could have been going on. Everyone in society, right? How hypocritical is that? So yeah, so that's the thing. I think that putting the blame on these enablers is forgetting that we're all looking at the same facts. Yeah, okay, you're supposed to say, oh, it's my kid who's in Michael Jackson's bedroom. Now he's probably, that's not a good thing. But if it's someone else's kid who's in Michael Jackson's bedroom, they might just be having a slumber party because Michael Jackson didn't have a real childhood. You know? And so I don't buy it. I don't buy that explanation. And I think that why don't we do this? It's because, yeah, maybe there's a little bit of the other versus whatever. We like blaming other people. We like blaming the enablers. We like blaming the parents. We like blaming whatever. We don't like blaming ourselves for having bad instincts before. We're all looking at the same facts. I mean, I say this over and over again because that is the only core facts is ones that everyone pretty much shares. And so what your opinion is, okay, now we've got new information because he's saying that it happened, but people had said it happened. I mean, we've got a very compelling and excellent documentary, and now we're more educated as to what it looks like behind the scenes. I've just come to a point where I've realized that, like, actually the world is full of pedophiles, and it is a reliable occurrence of evil that is happening all over society, and not just pedophiles, but sexual assault and sexual violence, and in a way that isn't stranger rape, in most circumstances, in a lot of circumstances at least. It is grooming people, yeah. Which is basically a seducing into a romantic relationship someone who is not really in an equal power position as you. And I think that's what people miss about so much of this, which is what is so great about this documentary, but is also something that I have become familiar with, like what is really going on just through watching other things and watching, society kind of expose more and more of this, to become familiar with that process before watching this movie, and then going, by the time I watched it, I knew that I was ready to basically completely change my opinion. And it was something that was so, why do I dread it? It's like, it's so crazy, but it shows you what your crazy is, what your embedded crazy is, in that I have some sort of property value in my mind over the memory of, like, who's the best at what. And Michael Jackson has that spot. And, like, if I destroy that property, then I have to decide who's better. who's got a better music videos, or oh, I had these fond memories of liking, Thriller, like it gives you a feeling, and I want that to be a good feeling, and that I have this vested interest in making sure that I have these good feelings associated with reliable things that I can pull from the well, like a piece of music. I think it's something that's so tough about memory, music, and in connection with memory, is that we almost use it as like, oh, I can turn on the song, pull from the well, good emotions. And there's happiness. And so you have this problem where you're looking at the cat is crawling across me right now. Yeah.
Heaven forbid he not be featured for more than 5 minutes.
Yeah. So I'm going to put him down. Anyway, and I feel that what is really happening is this conflict between someone essentially by revealing to me what Michael Jackson was. Let's just keep it at that for right now. What may have been is ruining mental property that I have in my brain, and ruining my ability to pull from the well by listening to any Michael Jackson music or just hearing it in relation to something, and ruining this for me. That's the point that is so jarring, and I think that everyone who watches this, especially people who really feel like they can look to Michael Jackson and pull from the well of happiness. And everyone, really, how many things are you going, I want this to be something for me, I have memory space, it's reserved, and I don't want anyone to attack it or take my mental property of goodness. And, that is really preventing people from seeing the world correctly.
I think there's a good argument to be made that our culture is fucked up. I mean, that we've had a culture. You think about the Me Too movement and how many people are coming out now, and, thankfully, in some circumstances, it's not killing people's careers or making it worse, but helping victims actually have a shot of being elevated after speaking up and saying their truth, like is happening for them now. But I think there is a problem that if he were to come out about it when he was in his 20s at that year in time, there wouldn't have been an elevating of him, there wouldn't have been a good understanding, and there wouldn't have been necessarily public support, which I think, so just to not necessarily critique him that much, I do think there's a factor of just society being a little bit sick in that way and not able to comprehend these things, and just a bias toward supporting Michael Jackson.
Let's talk about the idea of whether or not he was a pedophile, because I think that is more interesting because of the
whether or not he was a
whether
pedophile.
or not he was, because you say people who defended him.
Well, I think it's because we didn't know at the time.
Well, so the truth of the matter is, just to be clear, that the only people who know whether or not Michael Jackson was a pedophile is Michael Jackson and every boy that he slept in a bed with. Okay? And the fact that sentence comes out of my mouth is how we have such a debate over it is kind of crazy, because you can make a lot of speculation based on the fact that the only people who would know if a grown man and was a pedophile is him and all the boys he was allowed to sleep in beds with. I'm not saying it from any sort of legal perspective. I'm saying it from the perspective of, if you are Michael Jackson's lawyer or Michael Jackson's family or Michael Jackson's fans, you do not know whether or not Michael Jackson was a pedophile or wasn't a pedophile. Okay? So to make such strong claims, it's always suggested that the strong claim is that Michael Jackson was a pedophile, which is what the two guys are making, right? But we have such a screwed up version that we come to this from. And the other side going...
What's the screwed up version?
Well, the other side going, he wasn't a pedophile. He was a very nice man. Well, that's what the director said. I mean, what was I supposed to do by interviewing someone from the Jackson estate who clearly has up to $1 billion of incentive to make sure this is not true? Was any of them in the bedroom with Michael Jackson and the boys? Was any the hundreds of nights that this happens? It seemed to have happened over the course of Michael Jackson's career. There's no denying that Michael Jackson slept in bedrooms with boys without anyone else there, parents, whatever. Has never been denied. So if that's the playing field, I mean, this is why I feel so dumb. Like, it's just, pedophiles are a reliable phenomenon. Men sleeping with boys in beds platonically is not a reliable phenomenon. You know? And so the burden of proof is so screwed up in this case. You know, we're acting like, oh, they're making these claims out of nowhere. And oh, the people who are defending Michael, they think he's not a pedophile. No one was in the room. All we know for a fact is that Michael Jackson shared a bed with boys all the time, and the entire world believed this idea that Michael Jackson didn't have a childhood, and therefore he was just having slumber parties with boys. When the reality is we see pedophilia all over the place. And Michael Jackson, I mean, there's so many things about him that I overlooked. I mean, yeah, I thought he probably had as many plastic surgeries as anyone who was on Earth. And yeah, he says the reason his skin was the color that it was is because of a skin disease, but it's a little suspicious because of the way it kind of lightened up so ever gradually. And there's just a lot of things about Michael Jackson that if you looked at it, if you looked at it from the outside and you know who he was, you would go, oh, who is this creepy man? This very creepy man, you know? And he was like our weirdo, you know? He's like everyone's weirdo. He's like, he gets to be this beyond human figure because, and I would probably find the idea of calling him a weirdo like offensive before, honestly. Like I found like the Wacko Jacko thing offensive. Like it doesn't make any sense. It's obviously incredibly ridiculous for a grown man to be sleeping with boys in his bedroom all this time. And at the end of this documentary, we know everyone shares that same fact. That is the fact that is shared by everything. You and I do not know if he is a pedophile for sure. His family and lawyers and everyone else don't know either because the allegations are about what he did with boys when the doors were closed, and everyone admits there were boys in rooms with him with doors closed. Okay? And so that is the problem. That is the problem. Like, I see that people want to believe certain things about them. There's a lot of financial interest, and, there's a lot of mental interest. There's a lot of emotional pop culture interest. But the idea that just using your common sense, looking at the world and going, I get that I believed these things about why he was unlike every, he was just so different and just so like it just seems so ridiculous to me now. I just can't even believe that I bought into it. And I feel like the string story is the story that Michael Jackson just...
String story?
The story that we've been sold. The story that we've been sold is not the story that Michael Jackson was having these man-boy love relationships, which is really what it is. It's not. Mm-hmm. It doesn't even feel like a sexual assault. It's the way that my brain can actually more understand it because these kids clearly thought they were in a love relationship with Michael Jackson, and he was the only person that he was their god, and he was telling them how to show this.
I think that was one of the more interesting and kind of eye-opening aspects, and I think you have to watch both plus the Oprah special to get a good grasp. For anyone not intimately familiar with this, is my conception is any kid, no matter what, it would be violent or very scary to be sexually assaulted. And Oprah does it, and she asks great questions to just get you to understand how, from the kid's perspective, this felt like deep love. They were in love with Michael. Michael loved them, and it was very sweet and intimate, almost like he was just having a deep, and sexual relationship with a young child, and that at the time it wasn't setting off a flag for them. That wasn't causing them pain and trauma, at least that they perceived in the moment. because they loved him so much, and it was so powerful. They in fact, like, and Oprah says it's like, if you're touched in a certain area, if you're touched in your private parts, like, it's gonna feel good. And as a kid, they're almost so young and they're so manipulated that it felt like a positive experience, and not until way down the line does it start causing deep hurt and psychological problems, and they need help. But that was, I think, one of the most shocking parts, or eye-opening, is that it wasn't like he trapped him in a room and turned into a big monster, and then they were just so scared they didn't say. It was like they loved Michael so much, they had something so special with him, and he convinced them that, you know, this special thing we have, you can't tell anyone because that's going to ruin it. So it's just going to be our little secret. And he got into their psychology on this way where they felt they loved him and wanted to protect him in the secret, which I think, without really watching this whole thing, including the Oprah special, is very hard for someone to wrap their heads around without just hearing them talk about it at length, describe the grooming process, and then also Oprah asked those questions, and, you know, it described to us how did you feel about him? And the answer is they felt deeply in love with him. Mm-hmm. You know, they enjoyed it. It was not a scary experience. Mm-hmm. And all the way up to, oh, we're not going to tell anyone. It wasn't out of fear that the only fear they had was something happening to Michael.
That's why I think the Oprah line of, like, if your abuser's any good, you won't even know it happened until way later. You know, and for these two guys, until seeing kids of almost equivalent age and going, oh my God, I cannot imagine. I see how vulnerable these kids are. That was me thinking that I was in a relationship with this man and I was just abused. And I cannot imagine any man, woman, whatever doing that to my own kid. It seems to be the breaking point for both of them, really, is the confrontation with seeing a little version of themselves. And going, I cannot believe that happened to me. I was so innocent and I lost it. And just feeling sad for themselves through seeing for the first time what a little kid and how vulnerable they are. Did you ever think you were being fed a story?
Watching the documentary?
No. In all of your experience with Michael Jackson, that you're ever being fed a story that Michael Jackson, the only reason he's around kids is because he really loves the children and he didn't really have much of a childhood, and the reason he likes rides is because he was in the Jackson 5 from a young age and he never got to do anything fun like children. Don't ask why Justin Bieber doesn't do that, and don't ask why every other pop star child doesn't do that. You know, don't ask why not every kid who is a child star doesn't build a Neverland.
Well, let's go, you know, heaven forbid we ruin what you were, it's a great point, and it goes to what you were talking about. Like, what were you protecting? And that's everyone else. It's like, no, I don't want to go down that road because I've got all these precious memories and feelings. I mean, his music, his donations, like what he's doing for the kids. You want to ruin all that? Even the inquiry ruins all of that. You know, there's something psychologically we're protecting. And I guess for that, I see what you're saying, which is like, shame on us a little bit.
Yeah.
For thinking that it's such a precious thing to have that we don't ask the right questions and don't have the right level of suspicion.
Yeah, and then as to the other point, just to wrap it up, like the thing you were saying about historical figures, I mean, I am conflicted. But I do think that I think I'm still going to. So I took film, right, as a course in school. I took film, I took video, and so one of the films I remember we watched was Triumph of the Will. Do you know what that is? Mm-mm. Okay, so Triumph of the Will is So Triumph of the Will is the basically the Nazi propaganda movie about the Nazis coming to power, and Triumph of the Will is important in cinema history, just like a lot of very controversial movies are, because of the grandness that it achieved from a cinematic perspective. It was one of the first movies to do some of these shots that created in the viewer the sense that every superhero movie, when you see some shots that you're like, they're so big that you're like, oh my God, you get that feeling. You can't trace it back necessarily, but you can say that, like, who did it first best? you know, and Triumph of the Will in cinema history has a spot, right? Then again, obviously, like, not a good movie for people who are American, you know, Jewish people, right? Like, a horrible, horrible thing. A success, a piece of success from the opposition. In the same way that you'd see, oh, why are people joining ISIS online? You know, but to understand it and to even just talk about it cinematically, why it matters cinematically, I don't think I have to say, I can't watch Triumph of the Will because the Nazis made it, right? Because, like, even if you're someone who would be killed by the Nazis, right, you still can watch Triumph of the Will and go, like, someone did good film things, and, like, that's, like, part of learning. Like, sometimes learning, like, oh, that's their move. But, like, it's a move. You can use that move even though you're not going to frickin' talk about how great Hitler is and killing Jews and everything and how they're the worst. You know? And it's like, it's the same thing with Henry Ford. Walt Disney, right? They're two... I actually don't know the history. I know a little bit more about what Henry Ford did with his kind of putting out books about how basically there was a global Jewish conspiracy and how that was a problem. But Henry Ford and the and his innovations with the Model T and component part manufacturing. I'm forgetting exactly the word, but you know what the innovation that he did.
Factory line, or
yeah, it's like factory line, but it's basically standardizing all the parts so you can mass produce them, right? Yeah. You know, that is a huge innovation. That is, so many people have so much more and are so much wealthier around the world and have such a bit higher quality of life, you could even say, originating from that point. And because Henry Ford was before World War II trying to go around and you know, talk about how the Jew was the greatest threat potentially to the world. You know, that is it's a very conflicting thing. You know, but I think we still need to know about you know, what Henry Ford did in the business world and in the innovation world. And I think the same thing for Disney. I actually am not as familiar with Disney's past, but I know there's been allegations of anti-Semitism against him. And I think that goes back to when you're talking about a Thomas Jefferson, you know, having relationships with his slaves, having half children with his slaves, you know? I mean, that's even more than just having a slave. You know, probably very, very abhorrent behavior from him, aside from just doing what society was doing. And yet he is the principal drafter of our founding documents, which are, at least in my opinion, some of the greatest innovations in government that the world has seen. And so I think that yes, I'm not blind to it at all. I mean, I and you know, thinking about whether or not Thriller was the greatest music video ever. I mean, I don't want to underplay music. I think music means so much to so many people and is such a great innovation for humans and is so old for humans too. Matters so much to humans, and I don't even want to underplay what it is, but it doesn't even seem as big as some of those innovations for human history. And but I think that Michael Jackson is going to be a conflicted figure like these people, and I think that you're gonna have to sit there, and he's gonna have this complicated legacy, and if you're gonna be a Michael Jackson, if you're gonna talk about how his innovation with dance or potential things he did, I think if you want to be respected, you're going to have to talk about the way it was used potentially, or the other things he did. Yeah. Just in the same way that if you're going to present Triumph of the Will in a film class, you're going to have to obviously confront the fact that this is the Nazis, you know, doing their thing.
I'm not in favor of... I think you make a really good point. I'm not in favor of book burning. I like learning about and seeing
That's a really good analogy.
Yeah, I am in favor of... You know, I've gone to museums with Nazi propaganda, found it fascinating. I haven't read Mein Kampf, but I don't think it should be banned or made inaccessible, because obviously... I think erasing, I shouldn't say obviously, but to me, erasing history doesn't help anyone and is very regressive. And I think it just is a matter of, similar to how we teach our founding fathers or American history. I was taught it in this very flowery, ideals-only way. And I think we're starting to realize that, teaching the context of this moral failing of our founding fathers and slavery and how we treated Native Americans, it's like that just needs to be added in and baked in. Same with Michael Jackson. When I say I'm totally willing to throw out his music, I just mean I don't need to bump it at the wedding party and go, oh yeah, it's totally means the same thing to me as it used to. That's what I mean. I'm just willing to let it be contaminated a little bit or infused with this. It's gonna be a part of his story for me, and it's as we remember Michael Jackson, this documentary needs to be a part of that. The only thing I would have a problem with is just trying to deny this part of it and just hold on to what he was before.
Because my memory is so inflexible that I need to still keep, what I was making that analogy, pull from the well of joy, as opposed to just put it in a place in innovation or something a little bit more, unfortunately, maybe for memory's sake, sterile, but it still can understand what it means, but without having to be ignorant.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I can imagine seeing this in a museum, and it's Oprah touches on this, and the documentary does a great job of touching on this, is he was a pop star like there aren't pop stars, and may never be a pop star again. And it's kind of weird, with Bill Cosby being in existence. I mean, in an era where TV, the ratings on broadcast TV shows don't get repeated. I mean, the amount of millions of people, and it's this weird thing that we're gonna have to come to terms with, which the king of pop, the biggest of the big, had this hugely dark underbelly and used it to facilitate his abuse. It's gonna be baked in from now on.
Yeah. And no, I agree with you. And it's going to be something that's going to be hard to forget.
Yeah,
it's hard to forget, and hard to forgive myself for my former self, realistically. And maybe not everyone's gonna feel that way about it, but I just gotta be okay, I don't want to make that mistake twice.
Yeah, to me, he's I've heard on the radio, talks about it every once in a while in the last couple weeks, and they're kind of openly skeptical of Wade Robinson and James Safechuck, and I think it's really incumbent on anyone who is of that perspective doubting it. It's I just don't think you can hold that position and not actually watch both of the documentary specials plus the Oprah thing in full. I just don't think it's a very good position to just casually think that and think that it's not incumbent upon you to have to watch the whole thing. Because to me, I think it does educate someone. It at least did for me.
It does.
It was a crucial addition to the story.
Hi everyone. If you want to keep up with us, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube for the video episodes.